my name is Cain, and I am doing my paper on frequent testing and the effectiveness of quizzes. My study was conducted in a Department of Defense dependent school, or a DOD school, on a military base in Germany. Many of these students are in high-stress, volatile family situations. Many students actually have family members who are deployed in Afghanistan. Most of the population could definitely be classified as at risk. 2 high school classes were included in the study, and they are very different classes. One is an honors world history class made up of mostly 10th graders, and the second class is a world history class made up of 9th and 10th graders, and it is not an honors class. Almost half of the students in this second class have IEPs or have had IEPs sometime in their educational career. Each of these classes contain about 13 students. Although the scope of the study is very small, it does cover a very interesting and diverse population. This study attempts to discover the effectiveness of frequent quizzes on students' performance on comprehensive end-of-unit exams. For control, a unit exam will be given to each class without weekly quizzes. These unit exams were made up entirely of short answer and essay questions. The students were required to write in full sentences, and the scores of each student were recorded, and the scores between the 2 sections were also compared. The 2 classes are actually a unit apart in content. The honors section studies the content more in detail than the other section, so it typically takes this class longer to get through a unit. The 2 classes were also given separate exams appropriate to the level of the students in each class. For the next unit, the second unit, both classes were given weekly quizzes on Friday in which they were tested over the lecture notes or reading material for that week. These intermittent quizzes, weekly quizzes, were to prepare them for the comprehensive exam. They were given 1 or 2 key terms, and they were required to define the term and to state its historical significance. These quizzes were given for a grade, but a very small part of their grade. I hypothesized that these quizzes would prompt students to study more frequently instead of cramming the night before a comprehensive exam, and that would in turn improve test scores. These other quizzes also required students to write in complete sentences, therefore sort of prepared them for these all-essay comprehensive exams. The students' scores on the second test were also compared with the control, and the study studied the effect these quizzes had on student performance on these final unit exams through quantitative statistical analysis. Quantitative information was relatively simple to gather because quizzes and tests have numerical data. There's a good body of literature that deals with the effectiveness of testing in general. However, fewer studies actually look specifically at the effect of quizzes on the performance of students on unit exams. Many of these studies that I looked at have been carried out in a college setting, while fewer have been done to study the topic within a secondary setting. Other studies that have actually been conducted in a high school setting were conducted in a science classroom and a math classroom, and I hoped to add to this literature by conducting a similar research using similar methodology within a high school history classroom and see if the results remained consistent. The results of my particular action research did not support my original hypothesis that frequent quizzing would improve student scores on end-of-unit exams. There was no statistical difference found between the 2 means of test A and test B in either class. Therefore, it can be concluded that this data does not support the use of frequent quizzing in a high school social studies classrooms as a means to improve test scores. The study, though, does not look at all of the other benefits that frequent quizzing could potentially have on students. It simply focuses on the improved test scores on end-of-unit exams. The data actually contradicted the original hypothesis because the means test scores actually went down for both classes. However, this change was actually not found to be statistically significant. Any of the following factors could harm the reliability or the accuracy of my data. First, the unit tests were taken under very, very different circumstances per the request of my mentor teacher. My mentor teacher starts off the year by allowing all of her students to take unit tests with the assistance of their notes. Then, after they grow more comfortable with her style of teaching and style of testing, she only allows them to use one note card of notes. Sometime during the second semester, the spring semester, she plans to wean them off of notes altogether. This is an established procedure, and it was kind of interfered with the reliability of my results. The students in both classes took test 1, the first test, the control test, with the assistance of all their notes. And then they took test 2 with only a note card. Now, the difference in testing conditions were quite significant and could explain the actual drop in student scores. Many students complained when they found out they could not use all of their notes and had not prepared a note card, even though they had work time in class to prepare a note card. And this is a clear indication of a lack of study. The purpose of administering these more frequent quizzes was to presumably force the students to study at more frequent intervals than they normally would study. This also assumes that most students study in some way, even though it may only be cramming at the very last minute. This also assumes that most students want to do well on exams and quizzes. Most of these assumptions do not stand with this particular group of students. Many of the students did not care, and since the frequent quizzes were only worth 4 points, several students did not care about the outcome of the quiz at all. When the students did not care about the grade on the frequent quiz, the quiz ceased to be a motivating force. There's no measurable data for this apathy I felt in the classroom, but I really felt it as their teacher. The scores on the quizzes showed the lack of preparation shown by many students. Many students received D's and F's on the many quizzes. When I specifically asked them if they had studied, the majority replied in the negative. This was much more common in one class than the other. The honors students tended to study. The difference is reflected in the quiz and test scores included in my paper. The class average on the quizzes were very disappointing. Many of the students appeared to have forgotten about the quizzes as it wasn't part of their normal routine. Perhaps if the quizzes had been used over a longer period of time more regularly for several units, then the results may have been different or at least more conclusive. Further research needs to be done to prove this. Another uncontrollable factor that could have affected this study is the possibility of the students had to retake the end of unit exam. The recorded scores used in the study were the original scores of the students taking the exam for the first time. It is the policy of my mentor to allow for retakes and reworks. When students have the option of a retake, it appeared that they took the exam less seriously, making comments like, "I forgot this test, good thing I can retake it," and so on and so forth. Some even asked about retaking the quiz before they even looked at the quiz when I passed it out. 3 other major limitations of this study are the short time period over which the study was conducted, the small number of students who participated in the study, and the uncontrolled variables that I mentioned earlier. The study is a very small sample size, less than 25 students, only 22 students total. With such a small sample size, the accuracy and the reliability of this study goes down significantly, and the average score is easily brought down by one student who did poorly, and vice versa. Likewise, it can be easily skewed by one high-performing student. The standard deviation for all this data was very high for all of the average scores. The small sample also represents a very specific segment of the student population, and therefore my conclusions cannot necessarily be broadened out to apply to all students. Like I said before, my students are very at-risk students in a school that resembles an inner-city school with a high percentage of minority and special needs students, especially in my non-honors class. The culture of poverty pervades this school. These students, as military students, also have very unstable educational opportunities with little continuity over time. These are very unique students, and this experiment would have to be repeated under different circumstances with a different population before the results can be truly proven conclusive. The strategies that failed with this population could induce a different outcome with a different population. The study was also only conducted over a period of several weeks. The time between when I received my IRB approval and the research deadline was very scant and only allowed for the completion of 2 entire units. And so that is all the data I could include. The school in which the study took place is on a modified block schedule, and my students only had my world history class 2 to 3 times a week. And we had a lot of holidays right in a row, and during the month of November, the students had 4 long weekends in a row, and this meant I only saw my world history students 8 times over a period of 4 weeks. So this schedule was not really conducive to frequent weekly quizzing. I believe this study should be redone, like I said, under different circumstances with more time and more participants. I plan to use frequent quizzes in my future classroom and continue this research even in a more informal way. Perhaps after students become used to the format of the quizzes, these effects will be different and more statistical.